All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and our BCBA Exam Practice Question Series, where we're going through a set of questions together, breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyst.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack and our question bank. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in our Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Question 1. Ashley and Greg are on the show Love is Blind. Ashley asks Greg what his dreams are, and Greg says he dreams of moving to the countryside. Greg then says, Ashley, marry me. Greg asking Ashley to marry him is a what? All right, we have a verbal operant question. And in every verbal operant question, you're going to have a speaker and a listener, right? So you need to identify basically who your speaker and listener are and kind of treat them almost like discrete trials where you have your back and forth, okay? Because you have to remember verbal operants are evoked by certain things. So if we look at this first piece, right? Ashley asks Greg what his dreams are, and Greg says he dreams of moving to the countryside. Well, Greg saying he dreams of moving to the countryside was evoked by Ashley's verbal SD. There's no point-to-point correspondence, so that was an interverbal. But we're not looking at that. We're looking at Greg saying, Ashley, marry me. And Greg is the speaker here. So you have to ask, what evoked Greg asking Ashley to marry him? Well, A, attacked. Did Ashley, the person, evoke marry me? Well, no, because attacked is a label. Greg isn't labeling Ashley. He isn't labeling marry me, right? He's asking a question. What about an interverbal? Well, an interverbal is evoked by a verbal SD, and no verbal SD is present prior to Greg asking Ashley to marry him. A coic, same thing. Another verbal operant evoked by a verbal SD, but Ashley marry me is not evoked by a verbal SD. It was simply evoked by something else. The request was evoked by a motivating operation. There was a motivating operation present that led Greg to asking Ashley to marry him. All right. So that's why it's so important that you have to know the technicalities of these verbal operants. What evokes them? Do they have point to point? Are they formally similar? All those things are really important for answering these questions. So Greg requesting that Ashley marry him is evoked by an MO. Greg asking Ashley to marry him is a mand. You, a behavior analyst, explain to a mom and dad that you would like to teach a replacement behavior to their child to replace the target behavior. The dad asks, why can't we just get rid of the target behavior using punishment? How might you respond? A couple things to remember here. You've got to put yourself in the shoes of a BA. And first thing we think about when explaining something to a stakeholder is we speak in language that they would understand, meaning we don't use jargon, we're not overly technical, we're not trying to show off how much we know about behavior analysis. We're trying to explain it in a way that makes sense to the stakeholders. Second thing, we have to answer the question. The dad asks it's a good question. Why can't we just get rid of the target behavior using punishment? If all we want to do is get rid of this maladaptive behavior, well, let's just punish it and be done with it. But we know we can't just use punishment and we can't just reduce a behavior without doing anything else. Why is that? How do we explain that? A, if we are going to take a behavior away from your child, we must give them another behavior that can serve the same purpose. Good. This is essentially saying if I'm going to take a functional behavior away, I've got to give them another behavior that serves the same function. A is to the point, it's clear, and it's easy to understand, and it answers the question well. What about B? It is unethical to only use a punishment procedure with no other intervention. Good. We now have an ethical play at it, right? Well, technically, we could just punish the behaviors away, but we know it isn't ethical to do that. So B is also a good answer. Everybody understands ethics, right? Or what ethics are. C, the fair pair rule states we must replace one behavior with a functionally equivalent behavior. Now, C answers the question, but what's wrong with C? Well, first, when you use jargon, the fair pair rule, you use more jargon, functionally equivalent behavior, C is just going to lead to more questions. Well, what's the fair pair rule? And you're essentially just going to be repeating yourself. What's functionally equivalent? Again, just repeating yourself. When you could have simply stated, well, we take something away, we've got to give them something else, or it's unethical to use punishment with no other intervention. So A and B are clear, they're jargon-free, they're not technical. C is full of jargon, it's technical, it isn't clear. So if we're going to answer the question, we could use both A or B, or A and B, really. So the answer here is D. Larry set his cup on a wooden coffee table at his friend's house. The cup left a ring on the coffee table. Susie sees the coffee table and berates Larry for leaving the cup on the coffee table without a coaster. Larry never leaves his cup on the coffee table now. This is an example of what? Let's think this through. We have a situation where Larry puts his cup on the coffee table. It leaves a ring. Susie sees that, and she starts yelling at Larry to not leave his coffee table without, or cup on the coffee table without a coaster. So how does Larry's behavior change? Well, Larry never leaves his cup on the coffee table now. If you think about behavior questions that way, when you're thinking about consequences, it's really hard to go wrong. Because remember, when we're thinking about consequences, we're thinking, how is that behavior changing? Whose behavior is changing, and how is it changing? Because if no behavior is changing, then it doesn't tell us anything about consequences. Here, however, Larry never leaving his cup on the coffee table, well, his behavior is clearly changing. His behavior is decreasing. So we know it's going to be some sort of punishment, right? Because punishment decreases and reinforcement increases. So we can eliminate A, it's not reinforcement. What about B, negative punishment? Well, what was the consequence? The consequence was Susie berating Larry, okay? She didn't take anything away. She started yelling at him, berating him, reprimanding him, right? Adding all these insults, essentially, okay? And yelling and screaming. So it's going to be some sort of positive punishment, not negative. What about C, unconditioned punishment? Well, like praise, reprimands and insults and beratings like this going on here, those are conditioned. They're not unconditioned, right? Over time, they start to gain properties of certain consequences. And Susie berating Larry isn't unconditioned. It is conditioned. Because Susie's behavior or response of berating, right, the consequence of berating, I should say, had to be paired with other things, right, to create it as a punisher. It basically paired with other items and gained punishing properties. And we know it's punishing. Why? Because we're looking at how it affected behavior. In the future, Larry never leaves his cup on the coffee table. His behavior decreased. So this is an example of punishment. And what type of punishment? Well, it would be a conditioned punisher. More specifically, a positive conditioned punisher. Casey wants to lose some weight, so he goes on a diet which does not allow him to eat any dessert for 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, Casey eats an entire pint of strawberry ice cream. Relative to Casey eating the ice cream, this is an example of a what? All right, be careful here. Be very careful. We're looking at Casey, but we're looking at specifically Casey eating the ice cream, which is a response, okay, or behavior, right? So we know he wanted to lose weight. He went on a diet. Didn't eat any dessert for 30 days. Immediately, you should be thinking, okay, deprivation, thinking motivating operations. At the end of 30 days, Casey eats an entire pint of strawberry ice cream. And why is that? Well, he was deprived of dessert for 30 days. 30 days is up. That value of the strawberry ice cream has probably skyrocketed. However, we're not looking at the value of the ice cream. We're looking at Casey's behavior. So relative to that, what is this an example of? Well, a behavior-altering effect. Motivating operations have two effects. They have behavior-altering effects, which are temporary changes in behavior, and value-altering effects, which are temporary changes in the value of a consequence. The value-altering effect altered the value of the strawberry ice cream, but we're not looking at that. We're looking at Casey. This is the behavior-altering effect. It isn't an abolishing operation. An abolishing operation decreases the value, right, and abolishes and abates behavior. And it isn't a punishment procedure, right, clearly, because he's now eating all this ice cream. So this is an example of what? Well, it's an example of a behavior-altering effect. It's a motivating operation that temporarily changed Casey's behavior of eating the ice cream. Because why? Well, the strawberry ice cream increased in value. That's our value-altering effect. A woman has learned to blink anytime her husband pushes a button on their remote using his finger. After several days, the woman starts to blink whenever her husband moves his finger towards the button. This is what type of conditioning? Conditioning question, we have operant and respondent. And immediately the giveaway that this is respondent is what word? Well, blink. Blink is a reflex. When we're talking about reflexes, breathing heavily, heart beating quicker, sweating, blinking, sneezing, all reflexes, all respondent. So we know what happened. Well, we know this reflex, all right, was conditioned to happen when the husband pushed a button on the remote. So pushing a button is a conditioned stimulus. Then this conditioned stimulus got paired with moving finger towards the button, a neutral stimulus, to create another conditioned stimulus. So what we're looking at here is an example of when a conditioned stimulus creates another conditioned stimulus. Typically, we're looking at unconditioned stimuli or stimulus pairing with the neutral stimulus to create a conditioned stimulus. In this case, we have a conditioned stimulus creating another conditioned stimulus. So what type of conditioning is that? A, operant conditioning. It's not operant because we're dealing with this blinking, this reflex. B, respondent. Yes, it's respondent conditioning, but it's also C, higher order conditioning. Higher order conditioning is what we're describing. When a conditioned stimulus creates this other conditioned stimulus, we're talking about some sort of higher order conditioning. So what type of conditioning is this? B and C. Kind of a complex question. So if you aren't quite clear on this, make sure you go back and review respondent conditioning. Now, this is just a small piece of what you need to know, right? So we don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but you've got to understand how respondent conditioning occurs, right? Unconditioned stimuli, unconditioned reflexes, conditioned stimuli, neutral stimuli. You've got to understand what those things mean and then how the pairing process occurs. This morning, you receive an email saying that Netflix is now going to prevent you from sharing your password. You immediately log into your Netflix account and cancel your subscription. You are no longer charged monthly, and you never renew. What is the consequence relative to canceling your subscription? So the consequence is what occurs right after your behavior, right? So the behavior or the response is canceling subscription. So we need to track that down, right? You get the email, you log in, and boom, we cancel our subscription. So antecedent, right, is log in. Response is cancel. Consequence is what? Well, you're no longer charged monthly. So from canceling your subscription, you receive the consequence, or the consequence is presented that you no longer are charged. So A, the email you received. Well, no, the email you received happened well before that. B, logging into your account. Logging into your account is an antecedent. Not being charged monthly is the consequence. And not renewing your subscription changed your behavior. The consequence is no longer charged monthly. Pretty simply, you can see that because it's a pretty straightforward behavior question, right? Log in, antecedent, cancel, response, no longer charged, consequence. What is the consequence relative to canceling your subscription? C, not being charged monthly. Blaze is running Shape ID. He tells his client to touch triangle, and the client touches their ears. Blaze says touch circle and points to the circle. The client does, and Blaze says nice touching circle, and then waits and then starts a new trial. What did Blaze do wrong? All right, put yourself in the shoes of a behavior analyst, supervising Blaze and attempting to give feedback on his discrete trials. What we know is his client incorrectly answered the first trial. So Blaze introduced it, the second trial, with the SD, touch circle. He prompted, points to circle. The client responded correctly. Blaze responded with feedback, the consequence, nice touching circle, specified. And then he waited and started a new trial, post-trial pause. Did Blaze do anything wrong? Not from my perspective, right? We've got the SD, touch circle. We have the prompt. We have the client response. We have the consequence, the feedback, which is specified, right? Nice touching circle. And then the post-trial pause. So A, Blaze introduced a prompt in the wrong place. Did he? Well, we have our SD. We have our prompt, our response. Remember, the prompt goes in between the SD and the response. Prompt is in the correct place. No problem. B, Blaze's feedback was not delivered correctly. Blaze did a nice job of specifying what he wanted, which was touch circle. So good. C, Blaze paused between trials. That is not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? We have a post-trial pause. Just by nature, there's a pause in between one trial and the next. So really, Blaze did a good job. And D, Blaze did nothing wrong. Grayson likes to amuse himself while sitting in class. He will doodle on his paper, drawing all types of different superheroes and animals. Doodling is considered a what? Now, this is a pedantic question, right? A specific question, a technical question, but it's also a fundamental, okay? And it has to do with behaviors versus responses. Now, behaviors and responses, we use them interchangeably all the time. Everyone does it. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. When we're talking to stakeholders, they don't know the difference, okay? However, as a behavior analyst on the exam, and when you're talking in technical terms, you've got to use them correctly, okay? So what is the difference between a behavior and a response? Well, behavior is anything an organism does, right? And that's kind of like our umbrella. A response falls like the raindrops, right? Each individual instance of that behavior, okay? So a response is one instance of a behavior. The behavior is the behavior or the overarching behavior, right? Response is one instance of that behavior. So if we're looking at doodling just in general, okay, that's a behavior. If we said yesterday, James doodled a dog on his paper, that's a response because that is one instance of the behavior. And even then, I feel that's even too complicated a way to think about it, right? Responses are simply individual instances of behavior, okay? Think about it that way. Think about our contingency, right? Or think about a discrete trial. That's a good example. One discrete trial is one response. We have these target behaviors. One discrete trial is one response. Again, not overly complicated, but you've got to understand the difference for the exam. Definitely not a response class and a stimulus class, because response class would imply more than one response, and then stimulus class would imply multiple stimuli, which neither of us have. So if we're talking about his doodling, we're talking about his behavior as a whole, not an individual instance of it, but his behavior as a whole. Excellent. Check out behaviorAnalystStudy.com from ABA Exam Review. Be sure to like, subscribe. Let us know when you pass. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.